Recording in progress.
Traemos el mapa en la mano, voy caminando, yeah, hasta que cae la luna, yeah, hasta que el sol se alumbra, yeah, hasta que el mundo nos escucha, yeah, hasta que el mundo escucha. Gente de la tierra, gente de revolución, siempre en mis venas, gente de ríos que fluyen, gente chinampera, mi gente más fuerte que calor en la frontera, dentro del agua los balazos no lo encuentran, y pizzo sorchico y katia y cano yolo, amo no chiniquita y cano de lolo. Hijo de mi pueblo está bien lejos, me espera. Todo lo que tengo es más que el dinero. Si no trae luz no me cura nada. Tan profundo el mundo abajo. Yo espero que tú te escapes. Me dijeron no te pierdas en lo que pase. Donde somos, sabemos lo que es de nosotros. Sígueme donde vamos. Traemos el mapa en la mano. Voy caminando, yeah, hasta que cae la luna, yeah, hasta que el sol se alumbra, yeah, hasta que el mundo nos escucha, yeah, hasta que el mundo escucha. Siente la fuerza que transmite mi tierra, es la herencia que dejaron mis abuelas. Esta pollera se mueve y mueve, siente la música, hace que te eleve. No importa dónde vaya, yo sé de dónde soy. Sígueme hasta llegar al sol. Los caminos se unen, la profecía se cumple. El cóndor desde el sur, el águila del norte. Turi, ñaña y kunaja parichkan, ya con chihap mampurimu uchkan. No existen las fronteras, aquí chikuja, sasacha kunchu, uyari chikunchikmi. Pachamama wami, cuya paita canchic. Mi alma conecta con la yakumbama. Cuidamos lo que somos, a poco naja y aguanchic, nadie nos calla, aunque estemos en llamas. Gente de la selva, gente de la sierra, mi gente callejera bailando en la luna llena. Gente de la calle, vengo del oeste, mi gente nos esperan para ponerse de rebelde. Gente de la selva, gente de la sierra, mi gente callejera bailando en la luna llena. Mi gente se levanta, no importa lo que pase, mira la belleza en vivir como salvaje. Oh, quiero regresar donde somos, sabemos lo que es de nosotros. Sígueme donde vamos, traemos el mapa en la mano. Voy caminando, yeah, hasta que cae la luna, yeah, hasta que el sol se alumbra, yeah, hasta que el mundo nos escucha, yeah, hasta que el mundo escucha, 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 hasta que el mundo escucha.
Hello, folks. Hello and welcome. My name is Aida Machkic, and I am thrilled to welcome you all to tonight's call. Whether this is your first time or your 50th time with People Power, we are so glad that you are here with us. Next slide, please. Now, before we get started, I want to take a pause and introduce our translator, Liz, on the call and have them provide some instructions for that feature. Liz?
Thank you, Aida. Hi, my name is Liz Torres, and I will be your Spanish interpreter for today. I'm here with a community language co-op so that everyone can speak and hear in the language of their heart. So shortly, we will turn on interpretation, and you will see a globe icon appear on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Or if you are on a tablet or on a cell phone, you can access it through the More menu, and you can select the language of your heart from there. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Liz Torres y estoy aquí con la Cooperativa Comunitaria del Lenguaje y estoy aquí para que todos practiquemos justicia lingüística y así todos puedan hablar y escuchar en el idioma de su corazón. En un momento encenderemos interpretación y entonces usted verá un globo terráqueo, un pequeño icono en la parte inferior de su pantalla de Zoom o si no, si está en un teléfono o en un celular o en un aparato portátil, podrá verlo por el menú de más y allí podrá seleccionar el idioma de su corazón. And we can go ahead and get interpretation started.
Thank you so much for that, Liz. We just have a few more tech notes before we dive in. If you are having any tech issues, please drop a message in the QA box and an ACLU staff member will help you out. Because of the sheer volume of participants on our call, we have disabled the chat feature and we would love for you to use the QA feature instead so that we don't miss anyone's important questions tonight. We also have closed captioning available both in English and in Spanish To use them, click on the CC button on the bottom of your screen, then select Show Subtitles. Tonight's webinar will be much more engaging if you can join us using a Zoom app or your computer or your smartphone so that you can see the beautiful slides that we have prepared for you. And I also want to note that tonight, this is a closed space from press. If you are press and you're in attendance and you have need additional information or have questions, please contact us at media@aclu.org. And one of our staff members is going to populate that in the chat as well. Next slide, please, Zach. With that, I'm going to kick us off. I want to first introduce who we are. Like I said, my name is Aida. My pronouns are she or Aya. I'm the National Organizing Director with ACLU. What is People Power? People Power is a national grassroots army of volunteers fighting to protect our rights and defend our communities. Currently, as we're facing blatant abuses of infringement upon our rights, it's more urgent than ever that we come together to get organized, to learn, and to equip ourselves with the tools that we need to fight back. So while you sit in on our call tonight, please also sign up to volunteer with us. And we're going to provide you with a link on where you can do that. Next slide, Zach. Just so we're on the same page, I want to make sure that we review the agenda very briefly together and what you can preview. We just had our wonderful welcome, and we're going to be discussing some current landscapes. We're also going to be talking about ICE collaboration in our communities, what that looks like. We're going to be talking about immigration detention. We're also going to be building power together and what that means. And hopefully, at the end of it, we're going to have some space where your questions that you populate in that Q&A box will be able to get to in real time. And if we don't get to those Q&As, those questions that you have, we'll make sure that some of our staff follow up with you. And then we have an action for you to close off with. Next slide, please, Zach. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and friend, Silvana. Silvana, please welcome.
Hi, all. Sorry about that. Thank you so much. So really appreciate everyone being here today, and wanted to start off the conversation by kind of just grounding us in the moment we are in, and talk about, specifically in the immigration context and where this administration is in their goals. But before we jump into that, I did want to spend a minute to talk about the situation in Washington, D.C., including the federal takeover of their police and the National Guard deployment. Next slide. So on Monday, August 11th, President Trump signed two executive orders that allowed for the administration to take over DC's police department and to mobilize the DC National Guard to support federalized DC police. Since that time, we have seen the National Guard and other law enforcement patrolling the streets in neighborhoods, and this includes ICE enforcement. On the weekend of August 17th, the administration asked state National Guard troops to deploy to Washington, D.C. from states. So we've also seen a few states agree to do that as well, which is an abuse of executive power and something we're monitoring very closely. Next slide. So moving on from the DC situation, which we will talk about some actions that you all can take later on in the presentation, I did want to just give context for where we are in the Trump administration's mass deportation program. And more specifically, the different combination of factors that interplay to support this mass deportation agenda. So, for example, the using intimidation, coercion, and fear is a tactic that this administration uses to attack different segments of civil society. So this includes so-called sanctuary cities where, there may be states or localities that have policies on the books that are pro-immigration, and the administration has threatened, for example, to withhold sanctuary funding, and try to intimidate different mayors, or governors to walk back some of those policies. Another example is the unprecedented use of legal authorities. So essentially, what the administration is trying to do is widen the net of people who can be targeted by ICE and be fed into the deportation pipeline more easily. For example, people that are losing their TPS status, and may now be deportable, or in the future, or this has negative consequences for their ongoing immigration case. And then finally, there has been recent funding from Congress, $170 billion to be specific, for different segments of the immigration system over the next few years. So this is something that came out of the 2025 reconciliation bill in Congress, and will have negative impacts on the immigration system and allow for the administration to continue to work towards their goals. Next slide. So this graph really just shows the amount of money that I just mentioned and how that compares to past years, just to put it into context. So if you look at the 2003 number, 2019, 2024, it is just a huge, huge increase in the amount of money that the will be funneled into the immigration system. Next slide. So breaking that down, that $170 billion number, you can see here depicted exactly where that will be going. And I want to flag specifically the $45 billion for immigration detention, which I will speak more about later in this presentation, but that is money that will be used to expand our immigration detention system, and specifically to try to add more bed space and more people into the facilities. Next slide. So a key way that the administration has been trying to expand their capacity, particularly in immigration enforcement, is through a program called the 287G program. So this is something that allows for state and local law enforcement to partner with the federal government, and specifically ICE, so that they can carry out certain immigration functions and essentially support immigration enforcement hand in hand with ICE. So there are different program models. Some are more robust than others, but they give local authorities to the local law enforcement that signs up to carry out these immigration functions. So essentially, they allow for the deputization of local law enforcement to carry water for ICE. Next slide. So as I mentioned about this program called the 287G program, how this expands ICE's capacity because it allows local law enforcement to help them do immigration enforcement. The administration identified this as a key way to really be a force multiplier on the ground and allow them to meet the immigration enforcement goals that they have. So they have been very focused on expanding the amount of partnerships they have with these local law enforcement. And they've put a lot of effort since January to really up the amount of agreements that they have. So, as you can see, in the first Trump term at the peak, when they had the most agreements, they had 152 across the country. And during the Obama administration, they had 32 agreements. And from January to now, we are currently at 896 agreements. So that is a huge jump. They've spent a lot of time, for the reasons I've mentioned, prioritizing getting new localities to enter into these agreements with ICE. They have made it easier for them. For example, there used to be a vetting process to see, the background of the local jurisdiction, if they had if they had a history of racial profiling, for example, and, that a little bit would slow down the process, but they've essentially streamlined it. And now we're at this 896 number that is completely unprecedented and allowing them to continue with their enforcement. And as you can see from this map, these agreements exist in most states to varying degrees. Some have a few, some have many, but it's really pretty widespread at this point. Next slide. So just, aside from advancing this mass deportation agenda, there are harms related to this program. So they can lead to various negative impacts, such as potential racial profiling in officers or interpret complex laws. So trying to ascertain someone's status, for example, if they are deputized and out, looking to detain people, this makes the risk of racial profiling greater. So they may, for example, use certain last names or places of birth or perceived appearance as a reason for stops, investigations, or arrests. So really, that's very problematic, the potential racial profiling. And we have seen that these types of violations do occur. Localities that have been part of these agreements in the past have seen the certain racial profiling enhanced in their communities, which makes them liable for those potential constitutional violations. And we've seen localities be sued over time because of these violations and end up having to pay millions of dollars as a result. So not only does it harm our valued community members and make them into targets, it also can be a liability for these localities. And these expenses associated with the program, whether they're through overtime costs for officers that have to train to be a part of it, or because of the legal liabilities, can be entirely on the locality. We have more detail on these 287G agreements and the data that shows how they can be harmful in communities in a publication that my colleagues will drop in the chat. Next slide. So the good news is that these localities, there is no requirement to join this program. They can opt out and they don't have to enter into these partnerships to support this mass deportation agenda and to carry out these functions that are not within their purview as local law enforcement. So there are some sheriffs that have recognized this and the harm of these agreements and what they can lead to in their communities and have asserted their role that they do not want to do immigration enforcement. So you can see two quotes here They're just two of many that from sheriffs that have spoken out over time, just really reflecting this position that it's not their job to do immigration enforcement, and that's within, the jurisdiction of the federal government, and they prefer to focus on public safety matters in their own communities. So, next slide. So, given the explosion of 287G agreements that I've mentioned, that almost 900 number, the desire to resist against the administration's deportation agenda, coupled with the ability to opt out of these partnerships, has led to new local advocacy opposing these agreements. So there are people across the country and communities that may be, unhappy with the immigration enforcement that they're seeing and these new agreements that are coming in their states, and are finding ways to resist. So this is what happened in Camden, Delaware. We have the executive director of the ACLU of Delaware, Mike Brickner, on to share more about their 287G advocacy. So I will pass it to Mike.
Thank you so much, Silvana. And yes, my name is Mike Brickner. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the executive director of the ACLU of Delaware. And I know a lot of what Silvana shared is really heavy. And, if you're watching the news, if you're seeing all the things that are happening around in our world, it can feel very overwhelming, oftentimes. But I'm here to tell you that we can fight back against these 287G agreements and we can win. And I really want to give credit to the activists here in Delaware. It would not have been possible without the people power of ACLU members and supporters and the groups who were working with us to get the changes that we had here. So if you've been out protesting since January, if you've written your local elected official, if you have written a letter to the editor, all of those things actually make a difference because we have to set the stage and start to change the narrative around what's going on in our country so that when something happens where it's lightning in a bottle, we're able to capture that lightning and actually make change. And that's exactly what we did in Delaware. We started in January by doing activist trainings all throughout the state where we train people on Advocacy 101, understanding immigrants' rights, these 287G agreements, and we trained over 650 people between January and May, which for our small state is a lot of people. And we had actions every single week for them to write to our governor, to have meetings with their legislators, to write things to local media or on social media. And so we created a drumbeat that we were a state that was going to protect immigrants' rights and that we were a state that was going to look out for our neighbors. So we had a lot of our officials who maybe were a little bit scared of what might happen if they stood up to the Trump administration, but they also knew that the public demanded that they protect immigrants' rights. And so when we get to May 8th of 2025, that is really when that lightning in a bottle moment happened because we had volunteers, activists at the ACLU, along with one of our staff members, who checked the ICE website every single day. You might have seen that map that Silvana showed you a couple slides ago. And if you saw, most of the states on it were green, which means that you have a 287G agreement. There are also other states that were gray. That means that they've banned 287G agreements. Delaware was a white state, which means that we had neither banned 287G agreements, nor did we have any active 287G agreements. So one day, on a Monday, May 8th, some volunteers were checking the ICE website and they suddenly saw that Delaware had turned green. And so we were able to download the information from the ICE website. And we saw this little town in the center of Delaware called Camden had signed a 287G agreement about a week before. And nobody in the state had known about it. We started reaching out to officials if they had heard about it. everyone was really fairly clueless about this, that it seemed like Camden had just done it and had not told anybody. So we started to brainstorm in the office, what can we do? And we had contacts in the city of Camden, and we realized that there was actually a city council meeting that very night. So we contacted some of our activists from the ACLU of Delaware who had attended our trainings, and they went to the city council meeting. And during the public comment period, they asked the mayor and the city council, is this true? Did you really sign a 287G agreement? And the mayor and city council would not answer anybody's questions. They wouldn't confirm it. They wouldn't talk about it. They were really scared because they thought that they could do this in secrecy. And so when we heard the reports that night, we decided we needed to take action right away. So we worked with our advocates and our community, and we got together a letter to go to the city of Camden that ended up being signed by civil rights organizations all across the state. We sent it first thing in the morning on Tuesday. We alerted the press about it. We started alerting legislators about it. And suddenly, Camden was everything that people in Delaware were talking about. It was on every news channel. It was on social media everywhere. Legislators and elected officials were calling us, calling the city of Camden, and suddenly it became this big storm. Because again, we had set the stage that Delaware was going to be a community of neighbors, that we were going to be a state that protected immigrants. And suddenly we had this agreement that threatened all of that. And so that they reversed their decision to go into the 287G agreement, and they rescinded that agreement. It does not happen very often, but we were so excited about that. But we knew that also couldn't be the end of our work, because what was going to happen the next time that a different city decided to opt in Delaware? And so we started working with our legislators, and they said, we need to pass a law that would ban 287G agreements. Now, before this happened at Camden, we would bring this up with legislators. They would say, oh, no, this is going to be, too controversial. We don't want to get in trouble with the federal administration. We're concerned about passing something this extreme. But after Camden happened, and because we had built that public will, they were ready to take action. And so they introduced a bill into the Delaware legislature that would ban 287G agreements in the entire state. Now, it wasn't a slam dunk right away. We had some legislators who, again, were really concerned about potentially losing funding or having mass ICE raids as retaliation in our state. But one of the things that we did is we used our citizen activists to start to do Freedom of Information Act requests. And they started asking the city of London for their communications with ICE. And then they also asked other cities around Delaware, have you heard from ICE? And we started getting the word back. And what we heard was that Camden, even though they rescinded their agreement, had plans to start the agreement again once the legislative session ended and the 287G ban wouldn't pass, that they were just kind of taking a pause until the heat died down. And then we saw from other cities that ICE was actively courting them. So when we had those records, we sent them to local reporters, we sent them to legislators, the reporters put it out in the media. And so the day of the very first hearing on that 287G ban bill, legislators were passing out the emails to other legislators, and everyone said, oh my gosh, we could have other cities do this. We could have Camden enter back into that 287G agreement. We have to do something about this. We were also able to get our Attorney General to support the bill, which also brought law enforcement together because people saw that this was a threat to our public safety, that this was going to put our police in a bad position. And so it passed out of the House. It went to the Senate. In the Senate, we had dozens of community advocates, people from the Latino community, the Haitian community, who came and spoke about their personal experiences in the immigration system. Not a single person testified against that bill. The day that it was voted out, on the last day of session, It was voted out bipartisanly. So we had Republicans also vote in favor of this bill. And one of the biggest advocates on the floor of the Senate was a conservative Republican who said, this is not good for our local police. They're going to have a huge bill. They're going to be liable. It's going to drive a wedge between our community and our police. And we don't need this in Delaware. So we were able to pass it on June 30th, the last day of session. And you can see the picture there. That's the big picture. Our champion, Representative Mara Gorman, is in the middle with a lot of the advocates who had helped make this happen. And then the picture on the side is in July with our governor signing that bill. And so we have now become the seventh state in the country to ban the use of 287G agreements. And what's really exciting is that we saw the power in the people, that we had this huge win in Delaware. And so already other activists, legislators are talking about what are we going to do next session? How else are we going to fight back against what's happening in our communities? And so none of this would have been possible without activists like you on the ground every single day. And so if you're feeling hopeless, if you're feeling despair, hook up with your local ACLU and help to make that change because it is possible to fight back and it is possible to win. Thank you all, and I'll turn it back over to Silvana.
Thanks so much, Mike. Truly an inspiring story. And as Mike mentioned, while this 287G expansion has occurred to the degree that I shared, it's really important to remember that people have power and public opposition matters. So next, I want to shift gears a little bit and update you all on immigration detention expansion. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the funding piece of this already earlier within that $170 billion number, the $45 billion that will go specifically to expand immigration detention. So if you look at this graph here, it shows the amount of beds in immigration detention facilities in January and the capacity of the system then. And it also shows all the way to the right the goal of this administration, which is to get to over 100,000 beds by the end of the year. So we're essentially looking at doubling the system as it is now. And that's very concerning. This number, they are working in real time to get there. And they are doing a lot of expansion across different types of facilities to do that. Next slide, please. So just to give an idea of where this expansion will occur and the most impacts in which states, we wanted to show this map where the orange squares depict where the most expansion will happen. It's pretty widespread, so there may be 10, 50, 100 beds in certain states, but the states in the dark orange are where there will be at least over 1,000 beds added. So really the most expansive. So if you look at those, Texas, California, New Jersey, Indiana, Georgia, Colorado, Louisiana, are the places where we will probably see the most. And in some of them, for example, in Texas, we could expect up to 10,000 beds or just under that. So these are some of the numbers they're aiming for. And, that there's different ways they're trying to get there. But just wanted to share what the map looks like currently and where people will be mostly if they achieve those numbers. Next slide. So just thinking about the different types of facilities, so they as I mentioned with the 54,000 number in January, we have existing immigration detention facilities, so they are trying to fill those up and expand those if possible. If there's additional space they can rent, for example, if they can stand up what we call soft-sided or tents, essentially outside. If you are familiar with the Everglades detention facility, which has been cruelly dubbed Alligator Alcatraz in Florida, that is an example of a soft-sided facility where it's really just tents and not the traditional immigration detention facility we've seen. So these are new. We have seen this Everglades Center. There are others that will come online that are very similar to this one. And all immigration detention has pretty egregious conditions that are harmful to people, but these may or may not have running water, electricity, air conditioning only at certain points in the day. People may be exposed to the elements because they're tents and not structures. And we expect more of these to come online. So we just wanted to share that, this is something that this administration is doing to expand that detention capacity and to get to that 100,000 number as quickly as they can. Next slide. And then another thing they're doing, and one just last update on the detention expansion specifically and the different types of facilities that they are utilizing to get to this number is the detention of people on military bases. So there are 3 listed on the screen that we know of. The first, Fort Bliss in Texas, just opened last week and could be the largest space for detention in the country. They could detain up to 5,000 people. So this is just enormous in the context of what we have traditionally seen in immigration detention. For example, where I'm based in Florida, an average number for a facility could be 200, 300, maybe 400 people. So 5,000 is a huge jump. Some other potential sites are Camp Atterbury in Indiana and Fort Dix in New Jersey that the administration is going to detain folks in these in military bases. So just wanted to share a little bit on the detention side. We understand that this is very troubling, and we appreciate everyone who's on this call and cares about immigrants' rights. The current moment we are in is difficult, and we wanted to share what we know and what we see coming so that we can fight alongside you and take action. So with that, I will pass it back to my colleague Aida to discuss different ways to fight back.
Thank you so much to Silvana and Mike for all of the information that you have provided us with. Now, I can't move into my cheerful optimism, even if that is my general vibe. I have to acknowledge the fact that these threats to our rights can feel isolating. It can also feel really scary because that's what it is. It's truly scary. And it can also make us feel powerless. And honestly, that is their goal, to make us feel scared, powerless, and hopeless. But we know that we cannot fight this in the now. We are here for the long haul, right? And we're doing it at every level. Next slide, Slack, please. So we're going to be fighting it. As Martin Luther King stated, freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. And that is in every arena, at every level of government and together. Next slide, please, Zach. And I hope that we've been able to provide a space as a reminder that we are not alone. We are in it together. We've had over 1,000 people on this call tonight. So that is evident that this community exists and it's only growing. So after we're all done panicking, right, what are we here to do? We're here to organize. And here are just a few ways that you can take action tonight in this very moment. Next slide, please, Zach. First thing I would like y'all to do is, if you are able to, if you're on your desktop, there's a barcode, use your phone, slide over, and scan that barcode. What that barcode will take you to, and if you're not on your desktop, let me be clear, in the chat, one of my colleagues is going to provide a link for you. And I want you to sign up and demand DC statehood now. Now, with the statehood, DC residents would finally be treated like those in every other state and have the same guardrails against federal overreach. Next slide, please, Zach. And I saw quite a few questions in there, which we're gonna get to, I promise, because we're good on time, y'all. You can find out if you live in a state or a county that is a 287G county. How you can do that? My colleague is going to provide a link in there. And if you, again, have your phone nearby, scan the barcode and really identify if you live in a county that is a 287G county. And then next slide, please, Zach. Now, what I would love for you to do is also demand that we shut down the ICE deportation machine. And so by again, scanning that barcode or clicking on the link that is in your chat, we want you to urge members of Congress to demand access to detention facilities and fight for real accountability. Let's shut down the ICE detention machine. And now, next slide, please, Zach. And most importantly, stay involved, truly stay involved. Every action, whether that is small and it's a repeated action, it's a ritual type action that you do every week, makes a difference. And the way that you can get involved is multiple ways, right? You can volunteer. That first barcode, and again, links will be in the chat, lets you sign up to our ACLU People Power. You can also, if you are familiar with this space, or if you're not familiar with this space, we'll let you know. We are offering popular education. We are going to be holding our third popular education training virtually, and you can sign up to join. And if you've missed the previous two trainings, we have live recordings of that we can also provide for you. And reach out, contact us, get in touch with us. If there is a way and you want to get involved, please connect with us. And one more thing, you can also connect, and I urge you to connect with your local affiliate. We have our amazing Delaware affiliate with us tonight and our friends from Delaware on this call. Thank you very much. So also, if you are based in Delaware, reach out to the link in chat specific to Delaware, and please join their volunteer team. And they're doing amazing work. You've heard it from Mike himself, the amount of power that people have built in their state of Delaware. So with that, next slide, please, Zach. We have time for Q&A, so I'm going to invite my colleagues Silvana and Mike to join me. And we've seen that Q&A box, folks. Thank you for all of your amazing questions. Silvana, Mike, you're with me. Amazing. We have seen quite a few questions on 287G. And with that in mind, if one of the questions was, if your state is a 287G, is it possible for counties within the state not to cooperate?
Yeah, so that's a tricky question. If so, you can opt out of this program, so there's no requirement. For the 287G states, it's varied, the degree of those partnerships coming online. I want to go back to the QR code that you shared on seeing if you're a 287G county or not. This will take you, and I know there's been a lot of questions on this, specifically to the ICE website where you can see the existing agreements, and then there's also a different tab where you can see pending agreements. And this is where you can look and see how rapidly your state is or is not signing new agreements. So at the beginning of the administration, you saw some of those mandated states quickly, signing up if is on the list. And I will also flag that there are different local entities, not just counties. As Mike mentioned, a municipality, a local police force. In some places, it's state level agencies. In some places, for example, in Florida, we have even universities considering this. So it's not just counties, it's mostly counties, but there are different types of local entities that may be on that confirmed list that they have an agreement or on the pending list. And the pending list is really important because it shows you they haven't signed it yet, but it's in the works and they're moving pretty quickly. So that's really a great window for potential local opposition and whatever that looks like in your community. So just wanted to speak a little bit to that. And it's different across the board. We have some ACLU state affiliates that they are checking that website every day and they see something pending and then all of a sudden, it's confirmed. And so they're moving quickly. That list and those numbers are updated daily. And the QR code and the confirmed and pending list I'm talking about also show you what type of agreement that they are considering or have signed up for. So I mentioned the three different 287G models, some of which are much more robust and potentially impactful for community members. And so the type of agreement also matters. And so that can help indicate, the level of urgency and exactly what your sheriff or local entity is considering, as far as the scope of their partnership with ICE and potential support. So could not underscore that CTA enough to really understand, according to their own website, what's being considered and what's in the works in your community.
And I just wanted to add really quickly, if you looked at that map and you saw that your state was green, you might have said, oh no, my whole state has an agreement with ICE, but that might not actually be the case. Like I said, Delaware turned from white to green because one little town signed a 287G agreement. So if your state is green, it means at least one place has signed that agreement. So it's really important for you to go and to download that list and see who actually has the agreements in your state. But a lot of you were asking, if my state's green, can I ask people to rescind those agreements? Absolutely. If there's two counties in your state that have 287Gs, you can fight back against those. But also, if you have 10 other counties that haven't signed one at all, you can also, talk to those officials in those localities and have them pledge not to sign it as well if it comes to them. And that's how we can really, stem the tide of those almost 900 287G agreements.
Thank you so much for that, Silvana and Mike. And I think that leads me to the next question, which was, I think folks are wondering, what can you do if you're in a 287G state, but not in the county? You touched on it a little bit right now, Mike, but maybe expanding on that particularly would be really helpful for folks that know that their state, but not particularly the county that they're living in, and what could they personally do?
I'll start out, and I'm sure Silvana is going to have some ideas on this as well. But, as I said, the very first community and the only one that signed one in Delaware was Camden, which is in the middle of the state. It's very rural. There are not very many residents. It's a very small town. But we had a lot of people who took action on it because the way that we really talked about the issue was that it's not something that only impacts residents of Camden, because if the local law enforcement is sort of deputized to enforce immigration laws, that means wherever they're driving their cars, if they're out on the highway or out on the road, that impacts every single person who might be traveling through that community that law enforcement officer touches. And what we saw, and we talked a lot about this, and this is how we got, I think, a lot of civil rights groups together on this issue, is that there's a lot of social science research that shows when you have one of these 287G agreements, race profiling is just rampant in a lot of these law enforcement agencies. And so, we really position it as a statewide issue because any Delawarean could be traveling through there. And so we had people who lived, 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours away from Camden, also writing into to the mayor, expressing their concern about it. And so I think that even if you don't live in the community that has signed the 287G agreement, you're still impacted, your neighbors are still impacted, and you should still let your voice be heard on that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'll just add a really concrete example of what Mike mentioned on driving through. For example, in Florida, Tennessee, and other places, they, after, having these partnerships, they have done these checkpoints where they're on a major thoroughfare highway and they're stopping people all day that are coming from all parts of the state. So it really, if that checkpoint is in that 287G county, it really doesn't matter where you live, and it can impact anyone, just traveling up and down a major highway that day. And so that's something that we've seen as a key way that they're doing the enforcement, in ways that we haven't seen before, to be honest. So that's just an example of how, to Mike's point, that it is not limited at all to the county or local entity that signs up for the partnership.
Thank you so much, Silvana. Mike, we have another question that is pertaining to the detention facilities, where they asked, how do I find out where there are ICE detention facilities where they live? How do they get updates on that? Feel free to chime in, Silvana, Mike.
Yeah, sure. So there are a couple of maps. We can definitely find the most up-to-date map and share that. But for the new ones, the maps that we shared in the presentation are actually from a Washington Post article that shows their newest plans. So the orange squares that I showed, those are, for example, brand new agreements, what we call intergovernmental service agreements, or the soft-sided facilities that may not be, they haven't filled the space yet, but will be coming online soon. So I actually highly recommend. Map as well, so you can see the detention facility.
Thank you so much. And one of the QR code to be reshared. Everyone that is on this call tonight, we promise that you will get to that. Additionally, there was a question both for you, Silvana, and Mike. If an agency signs an agreement, can they nullify it? And how challenging is this process?
I can take this, and I'm sure again Silvana's going to have more to add, but this is exactly what happened and in our 24 hours of sort of barnstorming them, dialogue between them and ICE, and literally as of this date, the agreement is now rescinded. And political base building.
Recording in
Obviously,
progress.
particularly in red states, and you yourself being in Florida, how can folks push back these agreements in particularly red states?
Sure. Difficult to push back and organize. And so I will say, just centering community organizing, I think when there is building and robust public opposition, that will pressure sheriffs and, local commissions, et cetera, on considering these types of partnerships. I also think framing matters too, and that might differ state to state and local community to local community. The needs are different, the values of the community, and things they may want their sheriff and commissions or municipal leaders to focus on instead of immigration enforcement come into play as well. So I think some important ways to frame these partnerships in red states may be different than how you frame it in other states. For example, um, you might think about the money that's involved. These are at, the taxpayer's expense. I mentioned as an example the overtime costs, the liability costs. So that might matter in these certain states where they want to do immigration enforcement, but then there's these community harms that come with that, right? So I think the framing's important. Um, uh, and, again, just going back to the organizing, I think in some of the states that our affiliates are doing this advocacy in, quote, red states, the counties that have them are smaller and potentially rural, and being able to show up and demonstrate public opposition may be easier than in larger cities or areas. And so I think that's helpful as well. But I would say that the way the partnership is framed and the potential harms to the community and the harms that you highlight in certain states versus other states can be very helpful in the advocacy and thinking that through of what may resonate there versus elsewhere.
I just want to add that, we're not a red state, but in our 287G ban bill, in both the House and the Senate, we had Republicans who voted in favor of it. And I think it was really important we did not take for granted that we were not going to get those Republican votes. And many of the Republicans live in areas that have large numbers of immigrants in our rural communities and in the farming areas. And so we had local activists meeting with them, telling them that they wished to vote this way. But it was really, as Silvana said, how we framed it to them. We oftentimes brought folks who were domestic violence survivors or victims of crime who talked about how important it was for them to be able to trust and work with local law enforcement. We had law enforcement or former law enforcement talk about how this was a waste of resources and funding when we're looking at funding cuts right now, anyways, state and local governments. And that was really persuasive to those Republicans. And so, don't take for granted that you're never going to get those votes. We didn't need to have them. We could have passed the bill with only Democratic votes, but it made it even more powerful that we were able to say this is a bipartisan issue and that people across the political spectrum can agree on this.
Perfect timing. Thank you so very much, Mike, for joining us this evening. Thank you, Silvana. Always a pleasure. And next slide, please, Zach. As we close, because we are at time, I want to make sure that folks are, have the readily available resources and really know that this fight is not easy. And every single one of us has a role to play, right, in pushing this movement forward. So please stay tuned for a follow-up email that, as I stated and promised, we will have for you. That's going to be coming up tomorrow. And figure out ways that you can get involved. Like I said, those little repetitive, continuous actions make a difference. Connect with your local affiliates, your local community groups, and stay engaged. Truly together is the way that we're going to keep pushing for justice and the way that letting them know that we're not going anywhere. We're here to stay. I want to thank folks on this call. There has been over 1,500 folks that have joined us on this call tonight, and that is a testament to this community that we've created together. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your dedication. Thank you for your passion. And let's stay strong together and let's keep fighting and organizing. Again, thank you folks for joining us. Please stay tuned. We're going to leave these resources up for another minute. And thank you for your time this evening. Have a good night.